there's three paths to publishing. There's self-publishing, hybrid, and traditional publishing. And I did the second one. I was hybrid publishing. So my specific path was, I put out query letters to agents and everything to try and be traditionally published. But eventually I ended up hooking up with a small press publisher based out of Pensacola called Indigo River Publishing. And pretty much they are the bridge between traditional and self-publishing. Traditional, the publisher handles everything. Self-publishing, you pay for and handle everything yourself. Hybrid is right in the middle. So I basically had to, in order to produce the book, we agreed on a fee that I would pay them, and they did everything for me. They did the editing, they did the interior design, they did, get it listed on Amazon, get it distributed and everything like that. And I do, the marketing, I do the, basically that's it. I just do the marketing. So it's kind of nice. Whereas like now so I'm considered an indie author because I was not traditionally published. And I'm friends with a bunch of people who are self-published. And I know like how difficult it is for them to just handle everything, the workload that they put up with, contacting your own cover artist, getting your art, commissioned for you and everything like that. So there's definitely a balance. And someday I think I would like to be completely trad, like they call them the big five. It used to be big five and now it's big four. Like Simon and Schuster, Penguin, all the names that you'll recognize when
Penguin,
people say them. So it's so just interesting to me because there's pros and cons to all of it. And there is no right way to get your book out there, which is something that I've always said, because I know a bunch of indie authors who are more successful than some trad authors that I am friends with. So just because you get your book trad published does not immediately mean it's going to be a success. And I think that's the thing that not a lot of authors really realize when, they're signing these deals and they're like, this is the only way to make my book a success is to sign with Simon and Schuster. And I'm going to hold out until, I sign with them. So it's definitely interesting. And there's many paths that you can take.
What made you want to go hybrid over traditional?
For me, it was the best option, honestly. I'd been querying for maybe 6 months, which is not long. Some people query for a year. Some people it takes them even longer. Some people it's a lot quicker. Basically, for me, I was looking at all, I was facing a bunch of rejection. So much rejection when you're querying and trying to get trad published, that finally when this publisher reached out to me and said, hey, we really like your story, we think you have a good story as like a military veteran who's written a fantasy novel, we would like to publish it. For me, I was like, well, this sounds awesome. So, I sat down with my family and a bunch of people I trust, and I was like, what do you guys think about this? And they said, here's the good, here's the bad. And in the end, the good outweighed the bad. And, it's very interesting to me because when I started, I had no idea what I was doing. I had a much smaller audience, basically just family and friends, right, on Facebook. And since then, I just had November 2025 and December 2025 were the 2 best months I've had in my author career since my book launched. November was the best one, and then December was the best one. So it's crazy how like a book will find traction years later. And it's totally wild to me because I see my online presence growing and I see my audience growing and I'm like, what is happening? What am I doing? Like, I still, I'm just like, I make the content, I put it out there and it seems to resonate with people. But at the end of the day, I'm like, I don't know what I'm doing. I really hope this reel takes off.
Hey friends, if you're finding value in these conversations, it would mean a great deal to me if you would share the episodes with your friends. Word of mouth is how this show grows. It's how we reach more people with stories like these, and it's how we build this community of people preparing for their finest hour. Every share and every additional listener allows me to put more resources back into making this show even better for you. If you would do that for me, I promise to work intently to ensure this becomes a show you genuinely look forward to. rather than just another podcast in your feed. If you need something to share, you can head to yfhpodcast.com. Again, that's yfhpodcast.com. There it should have everything you need. Thank you, and let's get back to the show.
Dude, there's a few things that you said, like we were saying, all the context, or like I was saying when we started, all the context is like through. Now we can ask the questions that I'm like super curious about, and that's mostly in how people's brains think, I think is the easiest way to kind of get to that point. So I'm sure you noticed in the questionnaire, it's like, it was a lot of like decision making and like trade-offs and like what were the constraints. I don't know if you remember like any of that kind of stuff. And so personally, I care about people's stories, like their background, how they got to where they are, which I think is awesome. And your book does a really good job of like stringing that journey through, if that makes sense. You brought up the good versus the bad. So I wrote down 4 things, I guess, and I'll just list them out right now. So in the event that we go off tangent and I come back to them, like at least they're listed. One, I really want to talk about your process of writing. There's a few authors that I personally follow just through like podcasts or like some of their content. I'm a huge fiction fan. I'm more of like the sci-fi flavor. I'm a huge diehard like Star Wars fan. And so I'm very curious on your process of writing. When you reached out to the publisher, it was like you had to weigh the good versus bad. I'm super curious on what those pillars were, I guess I could call it. Like what was the good, what was the bad, what did the good outweigh the bad for you? And then the other thing I was going to talk about or ask you about was the mental health, I guess you could call it, is the like the overarching topic. And so I am super curious with the good versus the bad in your specific situation. When you sat down with your family, no one else had prior experience with publishing a book, right? So you're kind of like the first one stepping into that zone.
My dad had written a business book, so it was
Got it.
yeah.
Okay.
So he knew like what to look for in the contract itself, but path for publishing nonfiction is different than publishing fiction, which is my forte. So he kind of, it's like learning Spanish when you already know Portuguese. It's like there is some overlap, but it's not going to be one-to-one. All I got, man. That's all I got.
The linguists that listen to this are going to be like, got it.
Excellent. Yes. Yeah. So the good, well, I'll start with the bad for me. And it was having to pay to get my book published. Because a lot of people hear that and they're like, oh, why would you ever pay to have your book published when, when there's self-publishing out there, which like, to me, like I know roughly how much it costs to produce a book. I'm friends with self-published authors and they've told me the figures, and it is very comparable to what I ended up paying to have my book produced, which in the end was like extremely valuable to me. Because back then it was a lot of money for an enlisted guy, right? I was an E5 at the time, and I was like, oh, this is kind of a lot of money. This is thousands of dollars that I'm paying to have this book produced. If I knew then what I know now, I would have signed with them on the first day. I had a team at my disposal, right? I could bounce ideas off people. When you're self-publishing, you are a team of one. And, you and I both have been in one deep positions, and it's not fun when something comes up that you can't handle, right? Like I love being able to ask people for advice. I love being able to turn to someone and say, I can't handle this right now. Is there any advice or help that you can give me? So to me, hybrid publishing ended up being the right answer because I was able to be like, hey guys, I don't know what I'm doing here. Do you have any advice for me? Do you have any expertise that you can lend me? Really the only downside was the cost, the upfront cost, which ended up being like negligible. I've made that back, over the years, and it was an investment that was worth it to me.
Yeah. Do you remember what the cost was? Just for my own curiosity,
It
I
was
guess.
somewhere around $5,000 at the time.
Which, to your point, looking back on it, because as I was writing some of your notes, or excuse me, some notes from some of the stuff that you were saying, you paid the cost, the upfront cost, and to your point, as a E5, $5,000. So like, I don't know about all that, bro. Oh, yeah. For this thing that is not a validated concept, right? Like you
Mhm.
know nothing about this specific
Yeah.
organization. And so while there's the cost, there's the, I forget the word that you use, but like you just don't know. And so you felt like you paid for expertise, prolonged
Mm.
judgment, really, because I feel as if the way you described it, if you were to bring up an idea to the publisher, it's not really helping them and you at the same time. More than likely, they're going to
Yeah.
say no, which allows you to stay aligned throughout the entire
Yeah.
process, is what I'm gathering from
And
what you
and
said.
I was also their first fantasy title too. Like this was still they were a small publisher. They still are considered small press, but they're growing, which is very cool. And I there was growing pains, and both of us have learned a lot since I signed with them in 2016. But like they've listened to me on some of the input that I've had, and they've been really great about it. Like after my book sold well enough, it was only available at first in paperback, and then they were like, "Hey, we kind of want to put this out in hardcover," and I was like, "I didn't even know that was an option. That's a really good idea. Yeah, let's do that." So, there's definitely things that they've been working for me, to do and to help promote. And it is nice to have like a team. So yeah, that's one of the things that I'm happy about in the long run.
I was told that hardcover, just to give some background for the audience of like how much this stuff costs and how much it from the total cost actually goes into your
Yeah.
pocket. Just for example, I was told that the cost in total from paperback to hardcover is like a huge
And it,
jump. As far as like, let's say you sell it for $5, like that's a complete $2 out of $5 difference from like you getting $4 out of the entire
yeah.
$5.
And that's one of the biggest differences. That is probably the biggest difference between indie publishers and traditional publishers is the royalty split. Indie
That's what it's
Indie is
called.
a
Thank you.
lot
Yeah.
more generous. Indie is famously more generous than traditional publication, because traditional publishers are so huge that every cent is accounted for, right? They have giant marketing teams, they have in-house editors, they've got everything that you can think of. They've got 3 people on staff for what an indie publisher is going to have maybe one person doing. So the costs are, a lot more reasonable and manageable for indie publishers, smaller press, which is why they can afford to pay their authors better. And but it is also like when you have the power of a Simon and Schuster behind you, you're going to sell 10 times, 100 times what you might if you were just an indie author. Like, for example, I'm not in any airport displays. I've heard the number. I've heard how much it costs just to have your book placed there, and it's somewhere in the neighborhood of $30,000 just to have your books displayed in the airport, which doesn't even guarantee that they're going to sell, right? Like, every time you go by, you see the same books that are the most popular in the entire world because they've got the money to throw at them, right? They know they're going to sell. You go into an airport right now, you're going to see a copy of Fourth Wing. You might see Brandon Sanderson's Wind and Truth, which would be wild because it's a fantasy novel, but you're going to see Sarah J. Maas and A Court of Thorns and Roses. I can guarantee you right now, you go to 10 airports, you're going to see him in 9, maybe all 10. Because the publishers have that money, right? They're like 30 grand all day, and they'll unload 100 copies of them, but it's like, I'll maybe move 100 copies in a month, like on a good month, right? And the difference in scale is staggering. But at the end of the day, I'm one person, whereas the author, the publisher has to feed 10,000 people, right? So with my publisher, they're having to feed 30 or something like that. So there's definitely like at the end of the day, the money is also a big factor in it.